When I started this reporting, I thought that we might find that some kids were working agricultural jobs, maybe dishwasher jobs. I never anticipated that we would find this scope of children working these really industrial, adult, dangerous jobs in all 50 states. So really what I discovered is, I think, a child labor scandal in this country.
Child labor scandal indeed. You just heard from a New York Times reporter, Hannah Dreier, who penned an explosive New York Times expose on child migrants and how they are exploited by companies making the brands that you're very familiar of, things like Cheetos, Ford, Ben & Jerry's, and more. Now, Dreier spoke with more than 100 migrant child workers in 20 states for this investigation. The investigation also drew on legal records and interviews with teachers, social workers, and law enforcement officials. And here's what her reporting revealed.
I talked to kids outside of slaughterhouses when they were getting off their shifts at 7 in the morning. I talked to kids who were working as roofers at the top of buildings. Kids who had gotten seriously injured. Like you say, we found many examples of kids who had died on these jobs. And it's in the supply chain of, so many corporations. At the end of this reporting, I just felt like it was inescapable. I went to different cities and towns, and usually the next day, I already was speaking to children who were working these illegal, exploitative jobs. I talked to Christian in Southern Florida. He was living in a house full of other unaccompanied minors, other kids who'd come across the border without their parents. All of them were working full time. None of them had gone to school. Christian had come when he was 12, 2 years ago, and immediately the next day started working full time in construction. He told me that he doesn't know how to read, and he would like to learn English. He would like to learn how to read, but he can't go to school because he has a debt to pay off. He has to pay rent. And I went to a construction site and talked to him as he was putting the roof on a building. And he told me he had already fallen twice that year.
In fact, I want to talk a little bit about what the Labor Department has done to essentially hide the number of child deaths as a result of this underground, exploitation of children. Let's go to graphic 3 here. So the Labor Department tracks the deaths of foreign-born child workers, but no longer makes that data public, which is fascinating. Now, reviewing state and federal safety records and public reports, the Times found a dozen cases of young migrant workers killed since 2017, the last year the Labor Department reported any. Now, you might argue that the decision to stop reporting these numbers or making these numbers public happened under the Trump administration. But if I remember correctly, the Biden administration has been in place for a few years now and could have, done away with that opaque system of reporting. But let me give you some more information about these child deaths. The deaths include a 14-year-old food delivery worker who was hit by a car while on his bike at a Brooklyn intersection, a 16-year-old who was crushed under a 35-ton tractor scraper outside Atlanta, and a 15-year-old who fell 50 feet from a roof in Alabama where he was laying down shingles. And to make matters worse, these aren't unaccompanied minors who the Biden administration is unaware of. The Biden administration knows about them. They're not undocumented. The government knows about them. They claimed asylum and are awaiting their hearings. The Department of Health and Human Services has essentially released these minors to so-called sponsors without doing proper vetting. And I'll give you more detail into that in just a moment. Before I do though, Cenk, if this was going on under the Trump administration, I mean, you would hear from Democratic voters wanting heads to roll.
Yeah, so I'm gonna get to Democrats, Republicans, and everybody and what they're all doing wrong, okay? And they're doing different things wrong. But first, I just wanna say a couple of things. Families think that they're sending their kids for hope and opportunity here in America. And there's good reason for that because of immigrants like me and Anna. And our parents came a while back, they worked super hard. My dad sold pots and pans, her dad was a handyman, and they kind of lived the American dream. But the problem is they don't realize that was in yesteryear. Now when you send your kids, they just become a cog under capital rule, right? And so what that means is corporate rule, I'm sorry. And what that means is, oh, you got 15-year-olds for the new machine? Okay, plug them in, plug them in. If they get bulldozed by a tractor trailer, they fall off a roof, they're just a cog. They're just a cog in the machine. No one has any real power anymore. Corporations rule us all. So they just get plugged in right away. So don't be naive about that. That gets to my first myth, and then I'll get to the Democrats later. But the Republicans' mythology of like, oh, children working, it's kids at a Dairy Queen, on their summer job, and it's so innocent. No, meatpacking plants can't, and construction sites don't have enough people because unemployment is so low. And so they're like, this is super cheap labor.
Yep.
And we don't give a damn that they're 13 or 15. You see that picture in front of the bus? That was heartbreaking. That looks like a school bus for junior high. And they're all going to work.
This story is just filled with awful adults from beginning to end. Awful adults when it comes to the management of these companies that are exploiting the migrant workers, the child workers here, the federal government that seems to do very little vetting, very little oversight of this process, and essentially releases these migrant children over to so-called sponsors who actually are working with human traffickers in order to make money off of this. Okay, there was one particular instance highlighted in this New York Times piece that stayed with me because the sponsor was mistreating the child and essentially told the child, I don't care about you, you mean nothing to me, right? These kids are being exploited for money, they're being exploited for cheap labor, and it's not like this is all happening underground. Again, the Biden administration is aware about the children being in the United States, but they're not doing a good job in vetting and ensuring that these kids are safe. Now, with that said, Dreyer also described, the reporter here, the conditions that have led to this crisis. So let's watch.
This is something that I think has been building for maybe the past 10 years. And part of it has to do with the changing nature of the children who are crossing the border. 10 years ago, there were far fewer children, maybe 6,000 children a year. Now we're seeing 150,000 a year. And those children were often coming to reunite with their parents. So they would cross the border and be released to a parent who often would take care of them. Often that parent would have paid to have them brought up. And now what we're seeing is it's much more common for parents to be sending these children, and the children are under pressure to send back remittances. So the dynamic of who's coming has changed. And we've also seen a labor shortage. We've seen a couple dynamics that have sort of created a perfect storm for this phenomenon to really explode since 2021. And what the people who work with these kids out in the field are telling us is that they've seen this huge shift in the last 3 years. Middle schools where every 8th grader in the last 3 years has started working. Federal investigators who used to focus on sex crimes and are now instead focusing on pulling 12 and 13-year-olds out of factory jobs.
And the Biden administration is rightly concerned about how bad it looks when you have these unaccompanied minors locked up in cages as they await their asylum hearings. Now, I understand that, and I don't think the children should be in cages either. But just willy-nilly releasing them to individuals who claim to be their sponsors without ensuring the proper vetting is done beforehand is a problem. And what makes the matter worse, what compounds this problem, is that the kids sometimes try to get help from the authorities because they know they're being abused. And so they'll reach out to HHS. HHS will direct them to local police. Local police will take a report, and we all know what happens after the police take the report. Yeah. Nothing happens, okay? So children are being abused, and if you think, oh, they're just unaccompanied minors, who cares? I only pretend to care about children when it comes to drag queens or when it comes to transgender bathrooms or whatever. Yeah, I mean, you're full of it, right? Republicans who claim they care so much about the safety of children, full of it. And if you think this stops with migrant children, you'd be mistaken. Because as we know, in Arkansas, in Ohio, all these states are now pushing to loosen child labor laws for American children. Because cheap labor is how this country runs. Cheap labor and exploiting the most vulnerable people, including kids, is how this country runs, right? It's America's bread and butter.
So in the beginning, we had just been working, and then corporations decided, you know what, we're gonna, they were partly responsible. It's obviously suffragette movement, et cetera, but they decided we need more American workers, so then women started working. And it's not that women couldn't or didn't want to before, but all of a sudden when corporations needed more workers, women were allowed, right? And now they're moving on to our children. So now the children need to be working. And look, there's this absurd mythology from corporate media that corporations are humans and have emotions and feelings. No, they're gonna take the kids, they're gonna stick them in a meatpacking plant, assembly line, coal mine, wherever it is, and they're gonna make money. They don't care. Please, Jesus Christ, this whole talk of like corporations caring is nonsense, total nonsense. So now, what are the Democrats doing wrong? Guys, law of unintended consequences is real, and you have to think these things through. So when we say, hey, the parents that come, you will not be allowed in. But the kids that come unaccompanied, you will be allowed in, and you'll get to go not in a holding area, but go right into the country with a sponsor. What do you think is gonna happen? The most obvious thing, look, human incentives and disincentives are immutable. So if you're on the left and you go, oh no, that's ridiculous, the parents won't send their kids by themselves. Well, you're empirically wrong. Of course, one, logically, of course they will. Some number of desperate parents. Number two, the proof's already in the numbers. It's already over.
150,000 unaccompanied minors last year alone.
Yeah, unaccompanied minors. Why? Because they got the memo.
They're desperate. And the thing that makes me so sick is they're leaving their awful situation in Guatemala or whatever country they're coming from. And then they come here to be exploited by people in this country. Listen, I don't want to say Americans, but human beings can be vicious little animals, especially when money is involved. And they don't care if it requires the exploitation of literal children in order to make a buck. If they see the opportunity, they're gonna do it.
Yeah, and along those lines, I want you to understand how the system actually works. And before they get to the corporations, there are two other evil forces at work. One is the coyotes that bring them.
Yes.
And they charge them a ton of money, and let alone the fact that it's a super uncomfortable fact, but you have to say it, they rape a giant percentage of the women that they bring. And girls. So it is just absolutely heartbreaking. And so those guys are some of the most awful people in the world, and the guys who run the coyotes are the worst of the worst. Okay, so they bring them in, and in the past, what was happening in the beginning was, they have a distant relative in Michigan, right? And they get sent to Michigan. Okay, they never met that relative, but at least it's a relative, right? Now, a cottage industry of fake sponsors have arisen, and they're making money off the kids. They don't know the kids, they don't care about the kids. The coyotes hook them up to the fake sponsors. The sponsors get them, sometimes they get many of them, and they're making cash off of it. So now why are the kids going to work instead of school or doing both? Because they got to pay off the coyotes. Sometimes they have to pay off the sponsors. And the whole point was to send a little bit of money back home, right? And so now we've turned those little kids into these like money factories, where they're working super hard, starting at like the age of 12, okay? And a lot of them are leaving school and have no opportunity because they left school, all to make money for adults and grown-ups in this sick system.
Now, the department, HHS, claims that they're aware of this, they're gonna take some decisive action. So what does that decisive action include? Well, they want to focus on corporations that exploit the kids and stop taking their argument that it's really just third-party contractors that are doing this at face value, right? That's the common corporate lie and cover story that we hear whenever there's exploitation of workers, whether it be in other countries or here in the United States. And the Biden administration is claiming, no, we're not gonna take that argument at face value anymore. But what does that mean? What are you actually gonna do? They're gonna explore using a hot goods legal provision that allows it to stop the interstate transport of goods when child labor has been found in the supply chain. But clearly, child labor is all over the supply chain. So listen, what I'm just kind of sick of at this point is hearing a bunch of vague promises from politicians, including the Biden administration. A story that we're gonna cover later today has to do with Biden's executive order on gun control, which honestly is incredibly vague, lacks specificity, and is a bunch of BS if you ask me. Now, with that said, the other thing that they claim they're gonna do is create a joint task force with the HHS to better share information between the two agencies. So I guess enhanced communication. At this late juncture, I'm glad that they're considering that. Begin an investigation into Hearthside Food Solutions, which is one of the major food producers that has been guilty of exploiting children like this. And so, all right, let's see what happens with that investigation, if there's any real consequences. And when I say real consequences, I'm not just talking about like, let's give them a slap on the wrist with a little fine that they can easily pay and then forget about as they exploit more children, because it's gonna help them at the end. And if you're wondering why it is that politicians have failed to pass any comprehensive immigration reform, this is part of the reason why. Corporations love being able to exploit migrants, whether it be child migrants in this case, or undocumented immigrants who have no legal recourse if they're being abused at work. They love it. Comprehensive immigration reform might offer a little bit of protection for these migrant workers, right?
Yep. So last two things for me. One, we often criticize mainstream media, but New York Times, if you did stories like this all the time, we'd give you nothing but credit. Wonderful story from the New York Times and a great interview from Democracy Now! That we were showing you in the videos. And last thing is, we talked about Arkansas last week. Now we got Ohio. Now Ohio is saying this is not for migrant kids, it's for American kids. Extend the number of hours that they can work. And then you know what their excuse was? Because we want to get them off of social media and TikTok. We're worried about their mental health.
Right.
No, you're not, you liars. I can't believe any article would print that as if it was 1% true. No, your corporate donors told you we need more kids for our machines, right? As cogs in the machine. And these Republicans in Ohio, we just criticize Democrats and Republicans. You know we're honest, and they both have massive problems. But the Republicans in Arkansas and Ohio are like, get us some kids, get it to kids, put them into the goddamn mines and factories. We need more workers, and we need them to be real cheap. So let's use the 15-year-olds.
Yeah, and please spare me your arguments about how concerned you are about the poor children because of drag queens performing in front of them.
So that's such a great point.
I mean, come on.
So look.
They're putting kids in meatpacking plants where they could suffer from serious injuries, but then at the same time, they're pretending to be concerned about children as a result of drag queens performing.
So in one of the kids working at a factory that makes like Lucky Charms and Cheetos and stuff, they explained that the accidents that happen in that factory are like getting your fingers cut off. This one woman got her scalp removed by a machine. This is where the kids are, and they're pretending, oh, they just got a summer job, Dairy Queen. No, Anna's absolutely right. They're pretending to protect your kids in things like drag shows, as if that's like an epidemic for kids. Meanwhile, they're taking the kids and stuffing them into dangerous factories. And by the way, also mass shootings all over the schools. So you're not worried about the kids getting their heads blown off, but you're worried about a drag queen that a kid might accidentally see. 7 of them in the country? Come on. You guys, the right wing on this, obvious liars. You guys don't care about the kids at all. All you care about is distraction so your beloved corporations can make more money. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.